see if this works. Sorry again for the delay, but we're going to give it one more chance here. One more chance. One more chance. No, 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 no. Well, all right. We're going to try this one more time. If not, then I'm going to end up downloading this and uploading it to YouTube anyway, which will be weird because it's going to be on like an angle. But so anyway, so where does this come from? So we already have like certain issues that we know are caused by, say, deficiencies in certain nutrition, right? Like we have things like scurvy or rickets or beriberi or goiters. We know are an issue with iodine. You know, anemia, kwashiorkor is an issue with protein metabolism. You know, all of these things that we are not necessarily that we know are not due to a bug or an imbalance. It's in fact a nutrient deficiency, right? But then we have some other things that have kind of came and went that didn't have anything to do with injections, right? We have things like scarlet fever, which never had one, rheumatic fever, typhoid, cholera, tuberculosis. And now we have other things that injections get credit for elimination. And these are things like polio, like diphtheria, pertussis, measles. And remember before, for example, the measles vaccine, oh my God, watch what I say. Before the measles injection, like there were only 400 annual deaths from measles, and lifetime immunity from measles, which you got if you ended up catching quote unquote measles. Now that's a whole separate story to get into. So we're talking about a death rate, you know, back in the day of 12 per 100,000. So that is a 99.9998% survival rate. That's pretty high. And again, when you're talking about polio, 99.999. Now, these are all CDC numbers. Like this is just things you can look up. They're pretty straightforward. You know, pertussis, 99.9987, tetanus, et cetera. We're talking about, you know, 1 in 100,000, 1 in 500,000. These are astronomical numbers as far as survival rates. So we got to take it back a second quick, and we have to shift forward in time a little bit. So there was a study done in 1918. And what they did was they took 100 volunteers from the Navy. And it's funny, they always take, you know, obviously, you know, much respect to everyone who's served, you know, this country. But, you know, if you're in the Navy, if you're in the Army, you know, you're essentially guinea pigs for a lot of scientific experiments, because that's kind of how, unfortunately, that system's set up. But anyway, for this study, 1918, they took 100 Navy folks. Now you have to remember 1918, these are generally young men who do not have a lot of, they generally ate, you know, organic food because that was pretty much all that was available in 1918. They did not have, you know, 70 doses of a bunch of different injections because they just simply didn't exist. So these are generally like pretty healthy folks. And what they did, they wanted to see, this was around the time of the Spanish flu, right? 1918. And they wanted to see like how it was spread from person to person. So they took people who they thought had the flu, and they basically exposed each of these 100 Navy recruits, or I think that they might not have been recruits, they might have been in the Navy at the time, but they exposed them to different folks who had Spanish flu and thought that they would conduct, you know, the Spanish flu. And none of them did. So they thought that it was going to be basically, it was this certain strain of bacteria. They spent time around them. Nothing happened. And then what they did next was they actually took a swab and they swabbed those who were sick in the nose, in the throat, and then actually applied that the snot essentially and saliva of these sick folks into the Navy SEALs. None of them got sick. So again, like, how does this equate with germ theory? The idea is that you pass things either through the air, you know, or through saliva or mucus surfaces from one person to another. And what they're noticing is, again, you're actually taking the mucus from a sick person, giving it to a healthy person, not getting sick. So they actually took it a step further and took the blood from influenza patients and injected it into the Navy SEALs. None of them got sick. And then the fourth step of this was they ended up exposing. They took, again, each of the Navy SEALs and they made them spend they spend time with at least 10 different actively sick patients at a time. They would just sit there, have conversations with them for a while. And again, so at close range, so sitting, say, as far as, you are away from your phone or something like that, like next to the bed that they're in. None of the Navy SEALs got sick. None. Zero. So this obviously confused a lot of the scientists because they're going off of germ theory. And unfortunately, this is a study that has gotten swept under the rug, but it shows a lot of what came around. Again, there's something that was sent to JAMA. We entered the outbreak with the notion that we knew the cause of disease and we're quite sure we knew how it was transmitted from person to person. Perhaps if we learned anything, it is that we are not quite sure what we know about the disease. Now, this is again referring to the Spanish flu back in 1918, which is when they did this. They had it was about 100 Navy SEALs that they used as essentially the subjects for this experiment, who they exposed to a bunch of different people. And they were not sick at the time. So all 100 of them had no symptoms. They were generally considered healthy at the time. Again, this is over 100 years ago now. So this idea of germ theory, of passing it on, again, passing someone's saliva, giving it to another person via a swab, literally coughing and spitting in people's mouths, injecting their blood into someone else did not cause any symptomatology. So, obviously around the time this showed that there was clearly a misunderstanding of what was going on with the influenza pandemic, if you want to call it that, at the time, again in 1918. Now, this goes a step back because this is now basically, even though it was disproven over 100 years ago, it still is the dominant germ theory that we use that is the basis for conventional medicine that we know it today. And there's a lot of questions we actually don't necessarily know, especially when it comes to viruses. So first, we have to ask ourselves what a virus is. Now, there are two major theories as to what viruses are. Viruses are they're essentially non-living organisms that attach to a cell that get their material inside to cells to get that cell to replicate itself, because viruses are not living on their own. They're essentially well-organized parasites. Essentially, that's effective. That's the modern conventional way of looking at it. The other way is that viruses, or at least what we call viruses, are actually metabolic waste products of cells. So what you're seeing, because they're not alive on their own, they're actually given off by cells that are dying or sick or something's wrong with. And then the end product of what you see is what we call a virus. Now, those are competing ideologies. Neither one is necessarily proven. I would tend to lean towards the second one, mostly because it's the philosophical stance that you take, right? It has to do more with, do you believe the body is a self-healing organism, or do you believe that, things are around or trying to kill you in nature? And the reason I say this is because at least 45%, I believe now it's over 50% of the DNA of our DNA is actually viral. It comes from a viral, it has a viral origin. So 50% of human DNA is of viral origin. It comes from viruses. So viruses are responsible. So without viruses, it's important to realize that. Now we have 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells in our body. And we have 10 times more viral particles than we have bacterial cells in our body. So we are largely actually viral material. Now we can argue again as far as what that exactly is. What we do know, it is a collection of amino acids of proteins. It's protein structures, and that there are the two kind of ideas of where viruses come from and what exactly is going on. Are they a byproduct of cellular metabolism, or are they a molecular parasite? Depending on where you lean more towards germ theory or terrain theory, that might inform one of those decisions a certain way. But the only thing we know for sure is that it is essentially a protein structure. Fairly straightforward. What we know is that viruses give us the ability to adapt. Now, again, what is stress? Stress is essentially something that pulls us out of homeostasis, right? So and then viruses help us essentially adapt to whatever those stressors are. So it's really important to kind of figure that out. Viruses are an integral part of every ecosystem in the human body. And again, this goes back to terrain theory. Are we individual organisms? Of course not. On our skin, in our entire lining of our digestive tract, our lymphatic system that we're going to talk about in a little bit. All of this stuff, all of it is an ecosystem. We are not living on this earth as individual singular beings in a bubble. We are part of a much larger ecosystem. And that is true on the macro level outside of us and on the micro level inside of us. And what germ theory has essentially done is said that, oh no, this one thing is causing the problem. Don't worry about the rest of the environment. The environment doesn't matter. It's take this antibiotic, take this to kill this one thing. Don't mind the side effects, don't mind the other alternatives, and it becomes a big issue down the road. But the truth is, bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungi, all of these things are actually necessary for our survival and ability to thrive. When those are out of balance, and this is where the concept or many of the Chinese medicine concepts start to make a lot of sense, is that a lot of it is not written in stone like that. It's more of understanding the push and pull of everything in nature and finding a balance that you'll never truly find because it's always changing, it's always morphing, and our ability to morph and flow with it. If you think of like water, how it shapes to the container it's in, that's essentially kind of like what we're trying to do. So these are real limitations. And again, going back to the 1960s here, 1968. So in the Lancet, which is one of the most prestigious journals. I don't like using a ton of studies, but here we are. The germ theory has become a dogma because it neglects the many other factors which have a part to play in deciding whether host germ environment complex is to lead to infection. So it says it right there. Now, again, this is in the 1960s. Now, again, this is hard to find. You can find this in the Lancet. It's called The Limitations of the Germ Theory. You can look it up. 1968. People were questioning this over 50 years ago, but it still is the dominant system today. And it's crazy because, yes, while modern conventional medicine can save lives and is incredible in traumatic, acute situations, it is also the third leading killer on the planet. And it's particularly when it comes to anything that is outside of that immediate, trauma-based type of care, because that is where it works best in emergency situations. If we are not in an outright emergency at this moment, the wheels fall off really quick. We spend the most money on healthcare. We have the worst health outcomes for any industrialized nation. This is not new. The more money we put into healthcare, the worse our health outcomes tend to be. So the way it's working right now is not well, particularly when you're looking at, drug companies who own the media, who sell you the drugs that generally make you sick. They also own a lot of the food that we are consuming on a regular basis. Whether it's, the usage of glyphosate and other pesticides and processed foods that are all making us sick. These control the media, they control the politics, and it doesn't matter which side of the lane that you fall on. It's both sides. It's all of it. And the only way out of it is to continue to talk about it, to bring awareness, and to understand that there are other ways around it. And when more people just stand up and say no, demand something better, and actually act for themselves, it's going to be, we're going to get on the path to enlightenment a little bit. So, and you have to ask questions. If you're just blindly following, what other people are doing, and, they're saying like, oh, you're given a label, right? You have this disease, you have, these symptoms, take this proton pump inhibitor, take this antacid. Oh, you have a headache around your period, just take birth control. If you're just blindly following these things and wondering why weight's coming on and wondering why you feel like crap, or you have bowel disorders, or you're taking injections and you're wondering why, there's one of four things that's going to happen. It's bowel, breathing, behavioral, or skin issues. Usually one of the four, if not more than one, going to cause a lot of issues. At some point, hopefully, like the light's going on, and maybe this is a trigger a little bit, that be like, well, why? Why is this happening? Is potentially something going on that could be causing this? Are we truly just at the mercy of our environment, or do the actions that we take and make every single day actually make a difference? And health, essentially, if you look at it, is getting cells or tissues to function at their highest level. Illness is essentially, or what we call illness, is when that is not happening. At a fundamental level, if you break it down to cellular or the tissue level, is something happening on, are you functioning at an optimal level, or are you below that? Now, stress is important here, particularly when it comes to colds and flus, because if you are always in a stress state where you're in this high sympathetic fight or flight state all the time, I'm going to try to move this over here so we get a better view. That's going to cause some issues, because when you are in a high sympathetic state all the time, that is going to lower your immune system. That's going to lower your ability to manage any changes in the environment, because you are focused on surviving right now over what's going to happen a week from now, what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen the next day. None of that matters if you don't make it to 5 minutes from now. It just doesn't. So your blood pressure goes up, your blood sugar is going to go up, because you're going to get sugar into the bloodstream to go to muscles if you have to run away. LDL cholesterol is going to come up. Cholesterol is going to come up. Why? Because you want to bring cholesterol, which is anti-inflammatory, to where it needs to go from the liver, because most of the cholesterol we have is made in the liver. It does not come from diet. It is made in the liver. So that's important. But the sacrifice to doing this is, again, blood supply to the gut goes down. So digestion processes essentially go down. Immune system function goes down, because that's not as important. And your body's going to stop regenerating, because, again, regeneration does not matter if you're not living till the next 5 minutes. So, and so this is where disease is. It's fundamentally comes from one of three things. Like, sure, there are some genetic components. This is where something like iridology is really useful, because you can see which areas of each person, what you might be endowed with, what are your strengths and weaknesses. And this is how certain things manifest. Now, you'll see a lot of things idiopathic, right? High blood pressure. We don't know what causes it, but we'll give you a statin. Or high cholesterol, we'll give you a statin. Diabetes, idiopathic. Heart disease, for the most part, idiopathic. Like depression, kidney disease, liver disease. What it actually is acidity or toxicity. Could be deficiency too, but it's usually an acidic environment or a toxic environment. And now we are exposed to toxins at a level that we are almost have never been. Actually, no, never been, period. We are exposed to more toxic materials than we are. This includes most of the food we eat. This includes endocrine disruptors, what we put on our skin. This includes, the air we breathe.